So good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Laura McPherson, and I'm so happy to welcome you all to yet another Zoom call with your dedicated planning team. Tonight, I'm joined by many colleagues. I'm joined by my friends in the Venice LCP team, Eva Chang-Person and Jeff Cow. We're also joined by our colleagues who oversee the community plan update, Simi Aliou and Kanikia Gardner, who are also responsible for coordinating this meeting, as well as our supervisor, Melissa Alofaituli. And that's not all. We're also joined by Ken Bernstein and Shannon Ryan with the Office of Historic Resources, as well as Katrina Castagnata and Jessie Latigue from ICF Consulting. A special thank you to all of you participating this evening for taking the time out of your days to join us. The experience and expertise that you have in your neighborhoods is so important to the success of this process. As you probably picked up in the invitation, this meeting is about the resurvey of historic resources in the Venice coastal zone. And this is being conducted as part of the Venice Community Plan update effort. As part of the resurvey effort, the Venice Planning Team and Office of Historic Resources is collaborating with ICF and will be hosting a series of 3 public meetings. The purpose of tonight's kickoff meeting is to hear from you about the historic resources in your neighborhoods. This evening's format will consist of 3 presentations, and following the presentations, you'll be invited to share your knowledge, thoughts, and ideas about potential historic properties, buildings, or other resources that should be drawn to the attention of the survey team. The city team is also here to answer questions about what the survey means for you and your community. And before we get started, there's a couple housekeeping items or virtual housekeeping notes I'd like to go over. First, we have a great turnout expected for the night. Our RSVP was up to approximately 125 people, I believe. So as we go through the intro, we're going to have a lot of folks joining. So given this attendance, once we do begin our input activity, we'll try to be very conscientious of our comment period, and we'll probably have a timer just to ensure that we get as much input as possible. When we do get to the public input portion of the meeting, I'll also go over some instructions on how to let you know when you're interested in speaking, how you can participate. This will be very easy. Everyone will have the raise hand icon on their computer, but if you're calling in on the phone, what you're gonna do is use *9 to raise your hand and *9 to lower your hand. And also you'll use the feature *6 when you'd like to speak. That will unmute your phone. And if you do experience any technical difficulties during the Zoom webinar, please email Kanikia. Her email is Kanikia, K-I-N-I-K-I-A .Gardner, G-A-R-D-N-E-R @lacity.org. And we'll most definitely do our best to help out. We're now going to jump to our presentations. Presenting tonight are Simi Aliou, Project Manager of the Venice Community Plan Update, followed by a presentation from Ken Bernstein, the Office of Historic Resources, and then Katrina Castagnata and Jessie Latigue from ICF will have a presentation after that. And one other housekeeping note, for those of you who are joining us over the phone, you may also follow the slide deck, which you can find on our website. The website you can find the slide deck at is planning.lacity.org/planning the west side. The location of the presentation is on the main page, and it's called Venice Coastal Survey LA Presentation. Each presenter will also be sure to call out the slide number that they're on to make it easier for you to follow along at home. I'll now turn things over to Simi Aliou, who is our first presenter.
Thank you, Laura. Okay. We can start on slide 4. Hi, everyone. As Laura mentioned, my name is Simi Aliou, and I'm the project manager for the Venice Community Plan Update. The Westside Community Plans Update is a multi-phase, multi-year program involving the updates to the 4 community plans on the West Side, which include Palms Mar Vista Del Rey, West Los Angeles, Venice, and Westchester Playa del Rey. The West Side region is 27.5 square miles in total land area. Within this area, there are approximately 291,000 in population, 150,000 jobs, and 30,500 households, comprised of 59% renters and 41% homeowners. As such, this region is uniquely positioned to advance several housing and economic opportunities and larger connectivity to the rest of the city. Slide number 6. As we all know, Venice is a unique coastal community. There are currently 2 planning efforts taking place in the Venice community. The first is the update to the Venice Community Plan. Through the Community Plan update process, we will be updating the land use designations, implementing new zoning, and updating the policy document. The Community Plan plans and guides and growths, excuse me. The Community Plan plans for and guides growth and development for the next 20 to 30 years. Slide number 7. The second work program taking place in Venice is the update to the local coastal program. All of the land west of Lincoln Boulevard is located in the coastal zone, which represents 85% of the Venice Community Plan area. Therefore, in addition to complying with local city requirements, this portion of the plan area is also required to comply with state regulations established by the California Coastal Act. The Coastal Act is an umbrella legislation designed for local governments to create LCPs to uphold the policies of the Coastal Act. The Coastal Act mandates protection of public access, recreational opportunities, and marine and land resources. A local coastal program is a planning tool that guides development in the coastal zone by protecting coastal resources, maximizing public access to the shoreline, updating land use policies and implementation tools, and providing greater transparency and predictability in coastal permitting. Slide number 8. On the screen is a timeline for the Community Plan Update Program. We kicked off the Community Update Program back in July of 2018, so we're a little more than 2 years into this process. The Community Plan Update Program consists of 5 phases: the listen phase, the share phase, the consult phase, the finalize phase, and the adopt phase. A variety of activities are carried out within each phase. We recently completed the share phase with the draft land use concept webinars that took place back in July. We're now moving into the consult phase, which includes 2 major milestones, such as the environmental scoping meeting and zoning feedback activities. The environmental impact report scoping meeting provides an opportunity for community stakeholders to share their thoughts regarding what alternatives and environmental impact should be studied as part of the EIR. The zoning feedback activities will involve applying the city's new zoning tools to each of the parcels within the community plan area. The new zoning will allow us to better tailor how a building functions within a neighborhood by focusing on both its form or design and use. Slide number 9. Here's a timeline for the local coastal program. Both the local coastal program and the community plan update programs for Venice are in lockstep with each other, and both teams are working together in order to ensure consistency between the LCP and the community plan land use and policies. We are completing this resurvey as part of the community plan update effort because the survey results will help inform potential policies, programs, and zoning provisions in the new Venice community plan. The focus of tonight's meeting is the survey effort itself. So if you have questions or comments about the community plan, please feel free to reach out to myself or another member of the Venice planning team. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to Ken.
Thanks so much, Simi, and good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Ken Bernstein. I am Principal City Planner and Manager for the Office of Historic Resources, which is the Historic Preservation Office for the Los Angeles City Planning Department. And I wanted to provide some background this evening as we're looking at providing a survey update as part of this community planning process that Simi described. Wanted to give you a little bit of background about what's come before in terms of some of the past survey work in the Venice community, most notably with respect to Survey LA, the Los Angeles Historic Resources Survey Project. So many of you may be familiar with Survey LA already. It was the multi-year citywide historic resources survey of Los Angeles managed by our office, the Office of Historic Resources, and really reflected a partnership between the City of Los Angeles and the J. Paul Getty Trust. Both the Getty Foundation, which provided a multi-year grant to the city to conduct the survey, as well as assistance from the Getty Conservation Institute, which works internationally on historic and cultural resources. And we were very fortunate to have the Getty's involvement throughout the life of the project, helping to define the methodology and providing technical and advisory support. This was one of the largest and most ambitious surveys of its kind in the United States. Next slide. We're now on slide 11. Survey LA was explicitly tied to the type of work that we're doing here, which is really looking at historic resources to inform good planning in the city, to tie this to our community planning process. So in fact, we organized Survey LA and phased it in around the community plan boundaries of the city, and really reinforcing that the primary use of the survey funding was to be for planning purposes. So we completed Survey LA in 9 survey groups over a multi-year period, several community plan areas in each of the survey groups. And the Venice Community Plan Area survey was completed during 2014 into 2015. Next slide, slide 12. Survey LA, the methodology for Survey LA was quite in advance from the days of doing pencil and paper and clipboard surveys and writing flowery architectural descriptions back in an office. We took advantage of the use of technology, being able to conduct the survey using tablets and laptop computers, and significantly streamline the way that survey information, survey data was being collected. This was very much based upon accepted historic preservation standards in the field, state and federal standards. The survey was conducted exclusively by professionals in the historic preservation field, professional historic preservation consultants. A wide array of firms throughout Los Angeles and Southern California were involved in the project and worked as collaborators rather than competitors that they might have been in the past, to pool their expertise and conduct this survey. In some cases, they were assisted by interns and researchers, but the actual survey evaluations were conducted by highly qualified historic preservation consultants, architectural historians, and others in the field. And we didn't just send the historic preservation consultants out to kind of drive by and casually look at what they liked or didn't like about a property. All of their evaluations were anchored in a deep amount of understanding and research that had been conducted prior to the field surveys, guided by what's called a citywide historic context statement, which is a fancy term for really a technical document or a framework for survey evaluation of this type at a citywide level. The idea of a context statement is it is defining a set of what are called historic contexts, and then underneath that themes. And those themes really what influence the growth and development and evolution of Los Angeles in its entirety. And then kind of tying those themes that have shaped how the city grew and evolved, to what's left on the ground today, the extant historic resources that are still around us in each of our communities. So it's that link between the context statement and the themes that then informs how we look at what is around us in each of our communities as we do the surveys of this type. Next slide, slide 13. Okay, so just a little sampling here of some of the contexts and themes and sub-themes in the project. These include early residential development, looking at the early development of every community, individual architectural styles like the craftsman architectural style from the arts and crafts movement, but also much larger forces such as modernism, where LA was very much on the cutting edge of that, LGBT civil rights movement, looking at social and cultural significance, and even something as specific as air raid sirens and civil defense, which were, these air raid sirens were so prevalent during World War II and the Cold War era. Next slide, slide 14. Again, some other context themes and sub-themes, again, ranging from post-World War II suburbanization, which shaped the growth of much of the West Side and the San Fernando Valley, religion and spirituality, and then very specific themes or sub-themes such as Japanese-style gardens or even commercial signage. Next slide. So turning to Venice specifically, and this is what was surveyed for Survey LA. The Survey LA evaluation of Venice was the entirety of the community plan area. We're looking at a subset of that in this survey update, but the entirety of Venice had nearly 12,000 separate properties, about almost 12,000 parcels, and Survey LA took a look at almost 10,000 of those that were encompassed as part of the survey. What was not included were properties that couldn't be seen from the public right-of-way, that might be behind walls and other areas of the city, perhaps topography and other considerations are at work. Properties weren't surveyed if they were constructed post 1980, and we did not reevaluate already designated historic resources, properties that had historic cultural monument or local landmark status listed in the National Register of Historic Places or California Register of Historic Resources. Next slide, slide 16. Just here's a sampling of some of the already designated resources. Most of these are city historic cultural monuments. Some have National Register or California Register listing, ranging from Venice's original City Hall to Lincoln Place, the Garden Apartments in Venice that are so notable, and even the Chiat Day, the grand binoculars of Oldenburg, designed for the Frank Gehry Chiat Day building on Main Street. Next slide. This is a summary of all of the identified resources from Survey LA in the Venice Community Plan area, and just a graph that shows under what context they were evaluated as significant. The largest number, 73, were identified because they are significant intact resources from what we call pre-consolidation Venice. That's when Venice was its own city, its own community, before it became annexed or really consolidated into the city of Los Angeles in, I think, late 1925. The residential development, significance about residential development, the residential evolution of Venice was next on the list, but you had properties identified really because of their architectural significance or because of their significance to the institutional development of the community and the city. Next slide, we're on slide 18. So I wanted just to give you a quick sampling of some of the findings of Survey LA. This is not meant to in any way limit the type of input you provide tonight. I think we're looking to cast the net as widely as possible, to really be as open as possible to new input about what should or shouldn't be identified as significant historic resources in the community. But this is just to give you a sense of what the Survey LA findings were as a starting point for this survey update reevaluation. So we found through Survey LA a handful of residential historic districts. And again, when we're talking about historic districts, these were not designated as historic preservation overlay zones in the city. They were identified as appearing eligible for historic designation. One of those was what was called the Lost Venice Canals Historic District. This was reflecting the original development of Venice of America by Abbot Kinney in a neighborhood where the canals themselves had been lost and filled in, but the overall development pattern and much of the architecture did remain. So the Lost Venice Canals were identified as an eligible historic district. Next slide. We also, through Survey LA, identified 2 eligible historic districts of Walk Street neighborhoods in Venice. One of them, the North Venice Walk Street Historic District. These are neighborhoods that were identified as significant in part because of their intact architecture from the period, but also because of the unique development pattern that they represented with walk streets that was really quite unique throughout the entirety of the city of Los Angeles, having now completed a citywide survey, and even beyond Los Angeles, that the whole was kind of greater than the sum of the parts, given the significance of the walk streets themselves as an important defining characteristic of the Venice community. Next slide. The other Venice walk street neighborhood identified as the Millwood Venice Walk Streets eligible historic district. Next. We also identified as a eligible commercial historic district what was called the Windward Pacific District, which was again highly identified with Abbot Kinney's original development of Venice and America, with the iconic arcades that really define this as a kind of a visual icon of the Venice commercial identity. Next slide. So Survey LA also had a terminology that was called a planning district that was meant to, again, reinforce the link between the survey identification and the use of this survey information for planning purposes, such as the update of a community plan like what is underway now. And so we came up with a concept of a planning district. This is something that is a little bit distinct from what has been done in other surveys in other cities. But the idea was to identify neighborhoods that didn't quite make the cut in terms of being an eligible historic district, largely because of the effects of cumulative demolitions or alterations within a neighborhood, or kind of just an overall lack of a cohesive character that conveys that it is a historic district, to still flag and note that these are neighborhoods that have very unique planning characteristics. It might be the overall layout, kind of for a residential neighborhood, a set of subdivision characteristics, even landscaping, but have a unique character that should be taken into account as we do planning for that neighborhood looking forward. So one of the neighborhoods that was called out as a planning district was the Abbot Kinney, what's now a commercial district on Abbot Kinney. Of course, it had in the past decades much residential development as well. But identifying Abbot Kinney for its unique history, a number of individually significant historic resources as well. But because of the change of character, it was not determined eligible as a historic district, but something that we did feel should be highly noted for any community planning that's done for the Venice community. Next slide. And then we also wanted to take special note of the Oakwood neighborhood of Venice, and in great part due to its significance to African-American history, both for the Venice community itself and really citywide. And we have here on this slide some of the significant African-American related resources in the Oakwood community, including at the right, the Monday Morning Women's Club, which was identified as part of the survey, and now actually is a city historic cultural monument, thanks to much advocacy from the Oakwood community, as well as here in New Bethel Church and the Bungalow Court on Westminster Avenue in Oakwood. And I think we acknowledge that it's very important during this update process to make certain that we are fully capturing, perhaps in a way that Survey LA did not fully capture, to be candid, with the original documentation, that we are fully capturing all of the significant African-American resources in the neighborhood, and also fully evaluating Oakwood as a district and looking at whether it does qualify for potential historic district status. And I want to especially thank many of the members of the Oakwood community who've already been engaging with our office and with the community planning team to provide supplemental information on many of the African-American heritage resources in Oakwood. Laddie Williams, Naomi Nightingale, Miguel Bravo, Margaret Malloy, and many others have already begun working with us and sharing some of that information. So thank you, and we hope that that inspires many others as well to come forward with similar information as part of this process. Next slide, we're up to slide 24. Some other Survey LA identified resources: early Venice residences. Again, I spoke about consolidation with the city of Los Angeles. This is a handful of some of the early residences from that pre-1925 period. Next slide. Multifamily bungalow courts that are very distinctive throughout the Venice community plan area. Next. Our apartment houses throughout Venice, and particularly apartment houses along or near Oceanfront Walk. Next slide, slide 27. Commercial development in Venice, and individual signs that whether they are attached to buildings, integrated into buildings, or ghost signs on the walls of buildings, signage in of itself can be very distinctive and speak to the history of the community. Next. And in addition to commercial art, looking at more fine art street murals as an important defining feature of Venice. And I'm sure many of you know the rich legacy of street murals in the Venice community of all kinds. And again, we hope that if we've missed any in the initial Survey LA findings, that you're helping us point to murals that need to be called out in this survey update. Next. Schools, ranging from Venice High School to many of the elementary schools and other schools in the community, of course, can have significant architectural and cultural heritage. Next. And even historic resources in the public right-of-way, such as streetlights and the distinctive streetlight that dates back to the Venice of America period and Abbot-Kinney. Next. And then architectural styles, really about 100 years almost of architecture in Venice, ranging from the architecture of the early 20th century, which in Venice was frequently from the arts and crafts movement and the craftsman style, all the way forward to, on the next slide, postmodernism, looking at the more recent past, and Venice with its cutting edge architecture and many architects who really defined Southern California architecture for the last 40 years came out of Venice in the 1970s and 1980s, many of them working during that period in the postmodern style. Next slide. To close, just wanted to share that the Survey LA findings are all available through Historic Places LA, which is the Los Angeles Historic Resources Inventory. So Survey LA was our way of collecting the data through the field work based in the historic context, as I mentioned. But the survey information is now available in an inventory called Historic Places LA that is really the marriage of Survey LA and ARCHES, which was a system created by the Getty Conservation Institute, our partner, as an international standard for how we do heritage inventory and management throughout the world. Next slide. This is just a screenshot of the homepage for Historic Places LA, and you can search by theme or context or architect with using the search button on the homepage, or you can search by address or location using the map view function on the right of the top of the homepage. Next slide. And just a few details about Historic Places LA. This was launched near the end of the Survey LA process in 2015 and is the largest customization of the Getty's ARCHES system by any city or any organization to date. And again, this is incorporating international standards and kind of state-of-the-art in terms of cultural heritage management, and a system that can be used by organizations and agencies nationwide. But the point for Los Angeles is that we now have a single location where you can get much more detailed information about all of our historic resources. And this will allow us to thereby manage our historic resources and use this information again to help inform good planning. Next. And that concludes my portion of the report. My contact information is here. And with that, I want to turn it over to the ICF team, Katrina and Jesse.
Thanks, Ken. Hi, everyone. My name is Katrina Castañeda. I'm an architectural historian with ICF. My colleague, Jesse Laddig, and I will be giving the final presentation before we invite your feedback. The city has hired us as consultants to resurvey the Venice coastal zone using Survey LA methodology. So we will be stepping through our approach with you this evening. Next slide. We'll start with an overview of the survey methods. That is, how will we evaluate if a resource is historic or not? This community meeting is one of the first steps of the survey. So we will show you how it fits into the whole survey timeline and what to expect. Ultimately, the point of this meeting is to hear your feedback about which places in Venice you find important. So we have questions for you that'll help us understand what to look out for when we're out in the field. And we'll end our presentation with other ways that you can share your thoughts, since this meeting is just one of the ways for you to participate. Next slide. Thank you. With Survey LA, there are four primary levels of eligibility, and the region called Potential Historic District, also called a Historic Preservation Overlay Zone. Then there's the California Register, or at the highest bar, there's the National Register. And in order to be found eligible at any level, the resource needs to meet at least one of four criteria, which I'll cover in the next slide. And it needs to represent one of the themes, Survey LA themes, which Ken referenced, and possess historical integrity. So when we're out in the field, we'll be evaluating properties for their eligibility at each of these levels. And on the right-hand side, types of resources. Again, a single building can be eligible or as part of a collection of buildings, or maybe it's not a building and it's a street light with the potential to be historic. Next slide. Onto the criteria. So there are 4 criteria or standards under which a resource can be significant, and they are similar across local, state, and national register programs. They vary slightly in name. So that's what you see in teal on the left-hand side. It simply shows National Register Criterion A is the same thing, rather similar to the California Register Criterion 1, and finally HCM Criterion 1. So we'll start with A. Did something significant happen? Hello?
Hi, it's Laura. I'm just going to interrupt for a sec. I think your audio is a little bit slow on some of the participants' ends. So we're just going to ask if you could maybe turn off your camera, and we'll see if that will speed it up a little bit.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Sure. Is this better? I'll continue, and you can stop me again if there's trouble.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay. So we'll start with criterion A. This is about events. Did something significant happen at this place? What event is associated with this place? Criterion B, 2. Is it associated with a significant person or a group of people? And did they work or live there long enough for it to be significant with them? On to C. This is about design. Is it the work of a master architect or builder? Is the design special? Could it be historically significant? For example, this is an Art Deco office building, but is it one of the better examples of Art Deco architecture? And then for D, can the resource tell us something about prehistory and give us new information? Next slide. Ken mentioned the Survey LA historic context statement and themes in his presentation. So in order for a resource to be eligible, it also needs to represent one of these themes in LA and to be a good example of it. So if you go on the city's website, you can actually read about the history of any of these topics of the entertainment industry in LA, and it'll give you examples of places that tell the story of the industry in LA. A ton of research went into writing each one of these histories, and you can read up on also different types of architecture and feats of engineering and learn what makes a craftsman bungalow an eligible resource as opposed to an ineligible resource, and see examples. Next slide, please. Finally, an eligible resource needs to have what we call integrity. That is, does its physical features, its appearance, convey significance? And there are 7 ways a resource can convey significance. They're in teal here. Location and setting are similar in that they ask, are the building's location and its surroundings similar to when it was originally constructed? Design, materials, and workmanship relate more to architecture and physicality, whereas feeling and association are more about retaining character and a sense of place. The resource that we're studying does not necessarily need to retain all 7 aspects of integrity. It depends on the type of resource. So let's say you have a great example of a craftsman residential architecture, and it looks like it might be eligible under criterion C3. You have to ask, does the house still read as craftsman? And with this architectural example, the aspects that would be more important are integrity of design, materials, workmanship, integrity of feeling. Whereas if an important event occurred at the place, the workmanship and the design might not be so important, but it just depends. So onto the next slide, Jesse is going to talk about integrity in the arena of historic districts.
Thanks, Christina. I'm going to share some examples about integrity and briefly explain how historic districts differ slightly from individual properties. But then I want to let you know that at the end of that, we have a few questions for you that we hope that you'll participate with some your own input and feedback before we open it up to comments and questions that you may have about the things that we've shared on these presentations. So first, to help us identify groupings of resources that may qualify as potential historic districts, we use the historic context statements and themes referenced earlier. And then next, we look at all of the properties within the potential district's boundaries. It's possible that not all of the properties align with the overarching context and time frame, or what we call period of significance. Those properties that do align with the context and period are referred to as district contributors, and those that do not, we call non-contributors. The criteria and integrity aspects that Katrina just described are what we use to make that determination. So within a district, you will have a mix of contributors and non-contributors. And I'm going to share 3 examples. So in the slide here, number 43, assume that these 4 buildings are within the same historic district. Here, the 2 houses on the left retain their character defining features and they have high integrity, while the 2 houses on the right, they've had their windows replaced, and you'll note some of the material alterations to the example on the bottom. Therefore, it's likely that these 2 would be considered non-contributors due to integrity issues of materials, design, and workmanship. In the next slide, number 44, in this example, you see where these 4 buildings, if they were within a district of 1920s and 1930s residential development, the 2 on the left would be considered contributors, while the 2 on the right would be non-contributors because they were built later and therefore fall outside the period of significance. In the next slide, number 45, recalling the historic context statements and themes, in this example, the 2 buildings on the left fall within the multifamily minimal traditional architectural theme, while the 2 on the right are clearly different architectural styles and therefore would be non-contributors. Again, if these properties were all within the same district. It's important to remember that the contributor and non-contributor status applies only to properties within a historic district, not to properties outside those boundaries. However, you can still have a individually eligible historic property within, but separate from the historic district. And this happens when a single property meets different context and criteria from those of the district. So these are all conditions that we take into account in our survey. Next slide, please. Number 46. So there are multiple steps when completing a survey like this. After reviewing past results and doing an initial reconnaissance of the survey area, we will next go out and walk the neighborhoods, noting key architectural features, integrity aspects of the neighborhoods, the buildings, any of those non-parcel resources we heard about. And this is all done from the public right-of-way. We are looking for obvious alterations that may compromise integrity or eligibility, and we're going to document what we see with digital photos. And again, only from the public right-of-way. And instead of clipboards, these days we use tablets with the property data preloaded. We're going to note those buildings, neighborhoods, et cetera, that appear historic and that need further research to determine if they meet the criteria and can be considered eligible. Once we're back at the office/home office these days, we're going to review those properties that appear historic, and we will conduct any further research that may be necessary to clarify a site's eligibility. We'll determine which contexts and themes may apply, and if there's potential for a district. We may also look into the architect or the persons who live there through city records, permits, newspapers. And then we're going to take that information and step through the criteria for each level of significance, national, state, and local. We're going to look at the integrity aspects and determine whether the property could be considered historic. At that point, we'll briefly summarize the property's historic features and significance, if any, and will assign a status code based on its potential eligibility as historic. So basically, either yes, it appears to be eligible, or no, it does not appear to be eligible. And just to be very clear, the survey findings are not the same as historic designation. So again, the survey findings are not the same as historic designation. We are only determining if a property appears to be eligible under specific criteria from what we can see from the public right-of-way and discern from public records. So for example, our work does not include any archival research or an in-depth analysis. The survey is simply used to help make the public and decision makers aware that there may be something historic at that location based on context, criteria, and integrity. So again, it is not formal designation. So this data then gets shared with the city and Ken's team and will eventually make its way onto historic places. And then next slide, number 47. As part of our survey process, we are holding more than one of these community meetings in order to get your input and firsthand knowledge of those places in Venice that are historic and meaningful. Our goal today is about collecting as much information from you as we can before we embark on our intensive field survey. In the slide you see now, the red box signifies today. We plan on sharing our initial findings with you, probably this coming summer. Then, once we've received feedback and completed any additional research that may be necessary, we will again share our findings with you. And this is estimated to be at the end of next year. Next slide, number 48. So today we have a couple of questions that we want to hear from you on. I'm going to share these two questions, and then we encourage you to consider and raise your hand using the Zoom function or on the conference call, and share what you can. We're going to first ask you what comes to mind when you think of historic places in Venice, and what are the qualities that you think makes them important. And then in the next question, that leads us to our next question, slide number 50. Who are the people and groups who you know to have shaped and influenced Venice? So we're going to take a few minutes to hear from you about these two questions. As a brief reminder, we're just going to address these two questions at the moment, and we don't need too great of a detail at this stage. But then afterwards, there is going to be time for further suggestions and to take your questions about the survey. But at the moment, please consider only these two questions. And we have the next slide. Yes, let's hear from you. So first, what comes to mind when you think of historic places in Venice? Is it their architectural design or the era that they reflect? Is it because they are rare, or maybe you're the last of their kind? Is it because of an important event that may have happened there? Or did someone famous maybe live there? Jeff, it looks like we maybe have a couple of people.
All right, please raise your hand if you'd like to speak. The first speaker we have is Barry Castley. Barry, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, I think I'm unmuted.
Sweet, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you. What comes to mind to me is that there's an incredible number of people in Venice that are furious that this process is even happening after OHR abused the Survey process for the last 6 years, and after the city of Los Angeles lost its lawsuit about that abuse of Survey LA.
Barry, I understand and would like to remind you that we do have time for other comments following questions specifically, or rather input and answers specifically related to gathering additional input. So I want to thank you for that. We definitely have noted it. There will be time to talk about that more. And I'm going to kindly ask Jeff to ask the next person who has their hand raised.
Sure. Our next speaker is going to be Ali Bean, and after that, it's going to be Lydia Ponce. So at this time, Ali, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, there we go. So I was very heartened by Ken's presentation. I've never met him. I'm not all that familiar, frankly, with his office. The question that I have to all of you is, my husband lived here for 56 years. I've lived here for 33. I live in the Venice canals. I'm very interested in historic preservation. My mother was a historian and very involved with the historical preservation in the state she lived in Connecticut. The problem, the thing that in all of your pictures, Ken, that you showed of Venice, and then when I listened to Jesse speak about what would qualify as something that would be, marked as worthy of preserving in some way. The problem in Venice is Venice's greatest historic strength is its diversity. Most of Venice was poor. So we don't have fancy green and green houses with, perfect metal pegs that making the house up. And, I studied architecture at Yale, so I know a little bit about what goes into a great house. But what do we do? My question to you guys is, what do we do to preserve the character of this crazy, dilapidated, diverse? I'm very involved with Naomi and grateful to her for trying to now save Oakwood finally. I feel like every time a beautiful old house or a bungalow court comes up and a speculator comes in to take it down, we're not protected. And I know that it's a difficult thing to do with land use and planning, but I talked to Laura about it. What do we do? How do we develop a plan? Could it be that you keep the front of the cottage and then you build up behind
Allie,
it?
it sounds like you have a lot of suggestions and some very good points about.
My question really is, how do we protect what we have?
Yeah. Well, I think you hit the.
That's my.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head that there's a diverse range of types of resources. It's not just one. It's not just the biggest, the best, and the prettiest. And that is something that we're exactly why we're here today and asking these questions is, what do we need to pay attention to? Some of your other questions about character and the whole process, I will ask Ken to get to after we go through these two questions that are on the screen now. So stay with us because I think we will address those. I'm sure other people have similar questions in more detail.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you too. Jeff?
Thank you, Allie. Next up, we have Lydia Ponce. Lydia, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, good evening. Lydia Ponce, Venice. In response to who and what for your number 1 and 2 questions, I'll provide a couple of answers. I just need about 3 minutes or less. What this particular process lacks are the elders' content, the relevant stories that will tie in the neighborhood of the 90291. Survey LA isn't in the historical sites business. However, the people that are relevant to tying in a lot of the buildings on Abbot Kinney that haven't been demolished and modernized, the Fox Theater, which was originally a white-only cemetery, even Hoagie's, which is on Lincoln, needs to be taken a look at, and of course, the Westminster First Baptist Church. The non-contributors of the people who are, I beg you not to listen to them. The Venice Chamber, the Venice Neighborhood Council, and the LUPC as current. People like John Reed and Robert Thibodeau with the lack of integrity, and I'm happy to see that there's 7 aspects of integrity, have by function, you can take a look at who has profited in the last 20 years in demolition and ruin of Venice. There's not a lot left over to protect. Your department is responsible for the erasure of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, history in the 90291. So how do I know this? Because in Bernstein's presentation, he failed to mention Arthur Reese and Irving Tabor. And I ask that when you provide this survey, that you look at the murals at Market and Main Street on that particular southeast corner, And my last mural that you'd need to take a look at, what was painted over at the 76 gas station. And the who and what is that you need to take a look and visit with Save Venice and Naomi and a whole bunch, Laddie Williams, who can direct you to the elders, who can significantly tell you why the parts that are left over that make Venice Venice are relevant and should be protected. Do not look to these other people who collect $50,000 a year to supposedly serve us. They serve themselves access to profit off of decimating Venice.
Lydia, that was
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you. I really appreciate you naming very specific locations and people. I failed to mention earlier that in addition to the 3 different meetings like this that we are holding, we also have contact information through email for a couple of our different colleagues at the city, in addition to a Google Doc form that will be going up later this week. So if there are people that cannot attend this evening, or after this meeting, you have some other ideas about specific places and people we need to look into, there will be other ways for you to provide us with that information.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Jeff, I think we have time for a couple of more at least.
Okay, sweet. Thanks, Lydia. Next up, we have Sultan, and then after Sultan, we have Robin. Sultan, no last name. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, it's Sultan Sharif. How are you doing? Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I moved to Venice about 10 years ago from Detroit. I'm an African-American person in the film industry. Now I'm in a PhD program actually at USC. And so to jump right to the questions, one of the things that really has been important for me has been connecting with the historic, Baptist Church in Venice. Getting here about 10 years ago, as a lot of the neighborhoods were changing, I was on Dudley, which is one of the walkways, right down to the boardwalk. And then, I used to hang out at Abbot Kinney and, Pier 212 Cafe, which used to be Novel Cafe. And long story short, I just felt like a lot over the last 10 years, I've just seen so many things disappearing, but also as a, African-American professional, you don't see a lot of folks who look like me, especially a Black man walking around my neighborhood. You get more dirty looks than welcoming looks. And I feel like for me, I'd always felt like Venice felt like home from the moment I got here. And after I connected with the church and that community and started learning the history of Oakwood, it really, it made sense to me why I always felt connected. I later learned that my great aunts had moved here in the 30s and they had actually attended the church. And so for me, that community, I feel like is really important in terms of the narrative of it. I've been blessed to travel around the world, and I always wonder, what kind of world my grandkids will be in if they can't, if everything they look at is new or some gentrified thing. And I feel like we haven't really talked about that, but there's a cultural thing that I feel like has been shifting as the prices go up. I'm privileged, so I can afford to stay in the community, but I'm just seeing more Black and brown folks disappearing, and you feel less welcome as you walk around. And so I just feel like it's really important to preserve the stories and preserve the places that have history, not just sort of physical history, but the history of
cultural as well. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like Ken mentioned earlier that the Oakwood community, that there's an effort underway to understand what are the sites associated with that history. And we want to find out more about the people and the events that happen there. So thank you for bringing that up, Sultan.
Yes, thank you.
Jeff, we have two more, please.
Sure. Just a reminder for anyone that's calling in, if you'd like to raise your hand to comment, you would press *9. And so just a reminder to anyone that's calling in that they want to submit a comment. Next up, we have Robin. Robin, can you unmute yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Robin Mures, and I am also a longtime resident of Venice. And I'd have to say I'm in agreement with most everything everyone else has said. I'll just be specific on a couple of matters, and it's the city of Los Angeles that has been destroying some of the essential kind of iconic architecture and elements, and intends to, if we can't do something to preserve them. So you ask what makes, what are the places, and I'll just specify I believe the earliest bridge that was ever built in Los Angeles was for the Red Line streetcar, and that's the bridge that goes over Grand Canal on what is now the Venice Median. That is extremely historic and needs to completely be preserved, and its use is still very functional.
And I believe it was caught in the
Another
last survey as well. So you are spot on.
Okay, so and then it goes to what everybody's saying about, well, how do we preserve it? Because you probably know that right now the city is planning to evade every kind of environmental control, and that includes historic, and to build a huge structure surrounding it, combining 42 lots that would make that use of the bridge impossible.
Change its setting. It sounds
I
like.
use it all the time.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that.
Pardon me?
Again, I think that a question that regards that I will ask Ken Bernstein and other folks at the city to address in our next segment of comments and questions. Where
We need help.
I understand, and Survey
Yeah,
LA is the
desperately.
first step towards at least taking account of what is here, and then the next step we can probably walk through as far as what Survey LA does and does not cover. Okay, Jeff,
Okay,
I think.
and then let me just mention a couple other things. One is the streets that were originally canals. Years back when Councilman Rosendahl was in office, I asked if we could do an overlay so as to, like, when all those streets are paved, they could have sparkling glitter in them. That's a kind of pavement that is made. He never got around to it. He said, yeah, that's a great idea, but nothing was done. But those streets in themselves, people don't know that those were canals. And again, that's like a whole part of the character of Venice, is that it had lots of canals.
Yeah. Robin, it sounds like you understand, because again, that is another neighborhood that was identified in the previous survey, and as eligible. It has not been formally designated, and that may be something that the community going forward looks into. What are the opportunities to formally protect it and offer some type of interpretation? But I am unfortunately going to need to stop you there, because we do have a limited amount of time this evening, and I want to make sure that we get to the next segment where we'll be fielding some additional questions and comments. So Robin,
Can I
thank you
just
very
ask,
much.
is this being recorded? Because
It is,
I
yeah.
actually have to jump off now, and I'd like to be able to hear it later.
So yeah, I believe I'll ask Laura next to speak to this. Is being recorded, and together with the Google Doc form, we'll have a chance to share that with everyone, so you can go back and hear. And also, again, if there are other things you want to suggest or recommend that we take a look at in our resurvey efforts, you'll have a chance to do that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Laura, can I turn it over to you?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jesse. All right, everyone. Well, thank you, Simi, Ken, Katrina, and Jesse for the presentations. And thank you especially to all the participants who called in and shared your thoughts and ideas. I see that there are still about 9 hands up, and so we are going to get to those hands in just a moment. Now would be a good time for everyone to take a quick stretch. We're about 1/3 of the way through the meeting. And so I'm just going to take a moment to run through a few more virtual housekeeping items. And I see that there's been some additional participants that joined us since the beginning. Maybe you got stuck in some traffic. The network traffic can be heavy on the west side, I hear. Sorry, my first joke was maybe funnier. Okay, so as we continue the next half of the meeting, you know, these questions that Jesse had put up for us, those are really important questions that we want to keep hearing answers for. We also know that there's a lot of questions that have come in, and we are going to give everyone a chance to speak. We're committed to being here until 8:30 tonight. And so, like I said, maybe take a quick stand, stretch, get another cup of tea or something stronger, maybe like hot chocolate. But no matter what's in your cup, Kanikia is still here to help with any technical difficulties. So if you've experienced any technical difficulties in the first part of the meeting, please do send Kanikia an email so we can help you out with that right away. Her email is kinikiagardner@lacity.org. Kinikia is KINIKIA.Gardner, GARDNER@lacity.org. So if you have any technical difficulties at all, please let her know. So just a reminder that yes, this meeting is being recorded and it will be available. So don't worry about taking some mad notes. As we transition to the next portion of this evening's event, Jeff and Eva will be our main switchboard operator. So thank you, Jeff and Eva, for taking care of everyone. And just a quick reminder for those of you attending the meeting virtually, please note that the hand raise function is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Should you wish to speak during this portion of the event, please just click on that and Jeff will note that your hand's up and he'll add you to the queue. And then when he does call on you, just please remember that you'll have to unmute yourself as well. Next up, we have a lot of attendees also that are calling in this evening. So if you're on the phone, feel free to raise your hand through the *9 function, and then you can *9 to put your hand down. Then also, if you're calling in on the phone, you can use *6 to both unmute yourself and to mute yourself. And just so everyone knows, I'm going to do a final tally. We have approximately 75 attendees tonight. So as we do transition to the next stage of the meeting, it's important that we want to hear from everyone. So let's see here. If it's possible, we're going to ask that each speaker be given 2 minutes to share your questions. And then Eva will have a timer set as well, and she'll give you a gentle reminder if needed. Let's see, so maybe what we'll do next is Shannon, maybe we can go back to the, oh yeah, we have the keep hearing from you. And if it's helpful, we can also show the question slide again. The questions that we had up earlier are, what are the places you consider most historic in Venice and what qualities make them important? And as well as who are some of the people and or groups important to shaping and influencing the Venice story? So with that, I'm going to turn over to our switchboard operator, Jeff, and he'll take the next attendee in line. Thanks, Jeff.
Sure. So this is Jeff Cow. I'm with my colleagues, Eva Chang-Pearson, and we'll be coordinating the public comment for this meeting. Eva's going to be the timekeeper, and I'm going to be the person unmuting and muting people who wish to speak. So here's how it's going to go. Everyone who wants to speak should raise their hand. I see their hands raised already from the last comment period. So I'm going to keep those hands up because I'm going to call on the ones that raised their hand at the time first. And I will call on a speaker and then let them know that, if you're the next speaker. At that point, you're going to unmute your microphone. Each speaker will have 2 minutes. And when you have 30 seconds left, Eva is going to chime in and remind you to wrap up your comment. At the end of your time, you will hear a sound and you will be automatically muted. This is to ensure that everyone who wishes to speak will have an opportunity to. There is a possibility that we might not get to your comments, although we're really trying hard to get to all the comments today. But if we cannot get to your comment, then feel free to submit an email to either Simi or Kanikia. And before we start, I'd like to just apologize if I mispronounce your name. My last name is often butchered, so I totally can relate and get it. And so with that, we will go to our first speaker, Christina von Hoffman. And the speaker after that will be Kalani Whittington. So at this time, Christina, can you please unmute yourself?
Hi, thank you, Jeff. Hi, this is Christina von Hoffman. I'm here representing the community as a Venetian and also as a member of the board of the Venice Heritage Foundation, trying to build the first museum for Venice. And so thanks. I also want to say an echo to the fellow speakers that have spoken. I pretty much agree with all of the sites that have been named. I want to reiterate my support for the historic preservation of the First Baptist Church of Venice at 7th and Westminster. I also want to assert that Oakwood Park itself, right across the street, should be considered as a site of historic relevance and a resource to the community specifically, and most importantly, to the Black and African American community from the Jim Crow era on through the present day. Like, gathering spaces are key and vital to the not just the preservation, but also the celebration of culture. And as spaces in Venice become more and more privatized, we see less and less space for community to come together and to have the kind of natural intersections that that make up the real dynamic and incredible nature of this community, which is why so many people are passionate about it. And the last place I want to point out is the former studio of the artist Fred Eversley, which is in the building at the northwest corner of Westminster and Abbot Kinney Boulevard. Sorry?
I have a gentle reminder, 30 seconds.
Okay, I'm about done. Thank you. So this was home to a phenomenal artist by the name of Fred Eversley. He's also a member of the African American community of Venice. He found a refuge in Venice when he was not granted access into other beachside communities. And he made his home there for 5 decades. And that space itself is an important historic center. It's a classic brick building and should be preserved and considered as well. Thank you.
All right, sweet. Next up, we have Kalani Whittington. Kalani, at this time, can you please unmute yourself?
Aloha, Kalani Whittington here. I would like to suggest preservation of, well, pretty much all the buildings around Windward and Pacific, as well as the circle around Windward. But my primary concern is preservation of an improvement of Venice, the Venice area namesake, and that would be Venice Boulevard. I envision Venice Boulevard to be something like the Los Angeles version of the Champs-Élysées or Mexico City's Paseo de la Reforma, maintaining most, if not all, of the grandeur of the 6 lanes that run from Lincoln all the way to downtown LA. I believe that Garcetti and Bonin are trying to impede traffic on Venice Boulevard for their own purposes with road diets. And I would instead like to see Venice Boulevard maintained as the grand boulevard that it is, and improved with tree-lined streets, more art installations, fountains. It is the last remaining grand boulevard named after the Venice community and brings much commerce to the Venice community, but it is the last boulevard that runs from the sea to downtown LA. And our political leaders downtown, primarily Bonin and Garcetti, are trying to—
You have 30 seconds.
Thank you. Impede traffic with road diets. And I believe we need to preserve Venice Boulevard and the grandeur of Venice Boulevard instead of trying to stifle it and hinder progress and hinder commuter traffic, hinder commerce. So please, I will be in touch with Ken to see what we can do to preserve Venice Boulevard in its grand state. Preserve and improve Venice Boulevard in its grand state. Not to mention Venice Boulevard is also a tidal evacuation emergency zone, and they're trying to impede it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kalani. Next up, we have Rick Garvey, and then after Rick, we have Jane Spiller. So at this time, Rick, can you please unmute yourself?
Hi, thanks very much. I appreciate you letting me speak.
Sorry, Rick, can you, yeah, sorry. Go ahead and start over again.
So again, I want to echo what most people have said. I live in the Lost Canals district here in Venice. We were very interested in trying to get a historic preservation overlay zone back in 2014 when Survey LA was going around. And I was impressed with the methodology that they used. I'm also a public policy researcher. I want to just stress to ICF, if they are going to be doing this Survey LA again, that they use locals. I want to know if they're going to be hiring some people from Venice to do these surveys, because one of the things that I think can't get lost is that history is continuing. And some of the people, you ask, who are the people important to shaping and influencing Venice history? Well, I would argue that this survey and the people who do it, specifically, it looks like Jesse, your team at ICF, that you will be influencing Venice history. And so I hope that you are including locals in your process. And on that same vein, I also want to echo the fact that the First Baptist Church of Venice absolutely needs to be saved. And again, history has continued. And the fact that we still have that church as a cultural landmark, a place where the community could go, especially during the recent protests, in the wake of the death of George Floyd, that it was really important to me as a community member that that church was still there. And hundreds of my neighbors gathered there. And if that were to be gone, I believe that a significant part of Venice would leave with it. So I appreciate what you do, and I wish you luck. Thanks.
Thank you. At this time, Jane Spiller, can you please unmute yourself?
Yes, hello.
Sorry about that, Jane. Can you start over again?
Yeah. Thank you for holding this very interesting public listening session. I appreciate it. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Good. I wanted to ask you a question. Why did you choose the year 1980?
Sure. So Ken, do you want to take that question?
Sure, happy to. So 1980 was used as a cutoff during Survey LA because that Survey LA process started originally around 2006 with field surveys starting in 2010. And it was important to have enough time pass so that we had sufficient perspective on significance. To be able to kind of sort out what is significant and what is less so, and it's very difficult to do that for the most recent past. As the last speaker mentioned, though, time has marched on, and 1980, of course, now is 40 years ago instead of 25 years ago. And I think we certainly would like to make sure that we are encompassing historic resources from the more recent past. So as we do this update, feel free to suggest buildings and places that date from after 1980 as we begin to reassess this survey area.
I see. Well, I always thought that historic resources had something to do with 50 years of age.
No, thanks for that question.
Yeah,
that's a common kind of misunderstanding. The National Register of Historic Places does use what they call kind of a 50-year rule, so to speak, that if a property is younger than 50 years, doesn't mean it can't be designated, but it has to demonstrate exceptional significance. So there's a much higher bar for properties that are under 50 years. Our city historic cultural monument process, our cultural heritage ordinance in the city does not have a 50-year rule or any minimum age. And in fact, I showed the binoculars on Main Street. Those were designated when they were less than 20 years old. So there's no minimum age in our historic cultural monument program, nor in the state's historic resources register, the California Register of Historical Resources. But thank you for that question. That's a very common understanding that people have.
Okay, thank you. My second question is, do you survey the owners to find out their wishes?
So the survey, the way that we survey the owners is through this type of outreach process, and I think we're hearing from property owners as part of this process. The survey is conducted from the public right-of-way and is an objective evaluation. It is not a survey in that it is a questionnaire for owners. It is an evaluation of the properties. I think it's important to point out, though, that the process of adopting a local coastal program and a community plan and how we use the survey after the survey is completed will very much take into account the collective wishes of the community, including property owners throughout the community.
I see. Okay. And then my third question is, if you designate a property historic, will the city pay to restore or to maintain that property?
No, thanks for that question. The city does not pay to maintain a property. All private properties remain the responsibility of the ownership to determine what types of rehabilitation or improvements or repair work is needed. The city does, and this is a little bit beyond the scope of tonight's meeting, but the city does have a program called the Mills Act Historical Property Contract Program, which is a financial incentive for owners of designated historic properties in Los Angeles, properties that are contributing structures in our historic districts, our HPOZs, or properties that are city historic cultural monuments. And owners who choose to participate voluntarily in that program can qualify for what is often a significant property tax reduction that they then are using to kind of continue with substantial rehabilitation work on the property. So that is an important incentive program that our office offers for designated historic properties.
Okay, and I guess
Just
my fourth question is, what is the average life of a building?
I don't know the answer to that. That's an excellent question. And whatever the average is, obviously there's a wide range within whatever the mean would be, or the median. You have buildings, of course, that don't last to 20 or 30 years and others that endure for hundreds of years. So it's difficult to generalize.
So how long would you say that the average
I'm
building
sorry,
in Venice
caller.
would?
I just want to give you a heads up. You have 30 seconds left on your question there.
Good, good. I'd love to know the average life of a building in Venice.
I'm not sure how to best answer that question at the moment, but I think it's an interesting one. And
can you research that and get back to us?
Well, and when we have more results, it's I suspect that we can give you a range, and then within each age range,
okay. And the cost to restore. Can you please provide us also with the information on
that
cost to restore?
Unfortunately is not included within the scope of our survey.
Well, can it be? Can you add that on?
I'm gonna have to pass that question to the city.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, but again, I think it's really difficult. It is so site specific and building specific and related to, obviously big differentials among different property types as well, that it's very difficult to generalize on that, even within a specific community such as Venice. So I think it would be difficult to add that onto the scope, and it is beyond the financial resources that we have for this project.
All right. Thank you, Jane. Next up, we have Mike Bravo. And after Mike Bravo, we have Naomi Nightingale. So at this time, Mike, can you please unmute yourself?
Hello?
Yes, we could hear you.
Hi, guys. How you doing? How's it going, Ken? Mike Bravo, fifth generation Venetian. I've been, talking with Ken, and, thank you for your time and for this event. I just want to reiterate, I think sincere outreach to the communities, with the city's new commitment to mitigate a lot of the racial disparities of the past, deficiencies of the different policies, whether it's Survey LA, which does affect the OHR, and things like that. Because a lot of times when there's historical personages or history, a lot of times it's centered around famous, famous white personages, and there's like when we ask about names, for instance, like Arthur Reese and Irving Tabor, a lot of time it's their proximity to these white personages that gives them more notoriety. But there's a lot of support networks and families that gave support and resources to Arthur Reese and Irving Tabor. So maybe also considering, well, one, getting the criteria from the community, like the Japanese history, very rich over here, the Mexican American, the Tongva history, and really talking with those groups sincerely and getting an idea for what they value and what their criteria is and work that into the equation. But also too, considering beyond personages, communities as a collective. A lot of times, African-American folks and, people of indigenous heritage, like so-called Latino, Hispanic people.
Caller, you have 30 seconds.
Okay. A lot of times we come from very communal, kind of a tribal way we do things. A lot of times the effort goes to the community versus venerating certain people. So maybe trying to find a way to incorporate the collective community into, being considered of, I guess, a personage or factor that into the historical item. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Next up, we have Naomi Nightingale. Naomi, can you unmute yourself? And after Naomi, we have Sue Kaplan and then Jackie Freed.
Good afternoon. This is Naomi Nightingale. In response to the question about places, I'll just reiterate that the First Baptist Church of Venice is very, very important to be preserved and identified as a historical icon in our community. And the reason is because it was a very important spiritual and religious center where a significant majority of people residents that lived in Venice and others that came to Venice attended that church for all kinds of events, funerals, baptismals, gathering places for all kinds of events, whether they were to support the community or to support various activities within the church. Also, Oakwood Park. I attended that park when I was a very young child, and that park has been there, and I think it needs to be recognized. Its historical importance, particularly at First Baptist Church, is the very tall cross. I don't know how tall it is, but the neon light that says First Baptist Church is a way of a beacon for people in the community to know that that church is still there, and gives people a feeling of comfort that a place that they know and identify with is still a part of the community. There's other places in the community that may not exist anymore, but
Hello, caller, you have 30 seconds.
But they are still significant in the minds of people. So we should look at things like the Head Start program and the Irving Campbell Market and the names of personalities like Venus Darby and Vera Davis and Melvin Haywood Sr. and Kane Davis and Pearl White and personalities such as that really shaped the community and were icons within themselves for the value that they brought into the community regarding social justice. Thank you.
Thanks, Naomi. Next up, we have Sue Kaplan. Sue, can you please unmute yourself?
Thank you, Jeff. I'm not one of the furious, but one of the people who has found Survey LA to be a wonderful gateway into the history of Venice. And so I want to touch on that and echo what Mike Bravo said, and that is Venice is the most important historical place in Venice. And the way that Survey LA goes about it by looking at individual structures and not in a context has destroyed many communities. And I can think of one of them is the one that's just below the walk streets, and the other one is President's Row. These buildings are just being knocked down without any protections for the community to retain its character. And then the other one, which Mike was talking about, is that as I've been doing research, names keep popping up. And it's not important people. They're working class people who as Naomi said, were around these so-called important people, but they serve the community and their houses are being destroyed too without any recognition. So I just would like the next iteration of this to really—
Hello, caller, you have 30 seconds.
To really give each neighborhood its due. And just like the ones that you call designated historic, every house in Oakwood, every house in President's Row should be entered in the database, whether they are considered a contributor or not, because that gives you the better overview of what's going on and what the history of Venice is about. So that's my thoughts. Thank you for doing this, Ken.
Thank you, Sue. Next up, we have Jackie Freed. And after Jackie, we have Eric. At this time, Jackie, can you please unmute yourself?
Hello. Hi, I'm Jackie. I wanted to say, I think that Mike Bravo made some really good points. I want to make sure that Latino and Indigenous voices are not neglected during this process. I think that any understanding of a historic space needs to go beyond the time of Abbot Kinney and the development of Venice. So I just wanted to add another thumbs up for that. I think more should have been done to protect some of the spaces on Abbot Kinney, especially now that there are so many, big brands there that were previously not welcome, or not even not welcome, but they just still feel very out of character as a fourth generation Angelino, third generation Venetian. So I don't know if it's possible to go back and retroactively do anything about that, but that's just a thought. It was interesting to hear about thinking of newer spaces as being historically significant as well, because I feel like increasingly we're seeing artist spaces and warehouses start to be sold and developed. And so the more that we can protect those to keep the character of artistry and Venice's creative history alive, I think that would be something to consider as well in terms of looking at new.
You have 30 seconds.
Okay, cool. Thanks. I also had a couple questions. So would it be possible to establish some sort of like grandfather clause where people whose ownership was established prior to Survey LA could choose to opt out of the designation process? I don't know how it goes with establishing new HPOZs. Typically, it seems like a community supported effort and there's a large agreed consensus. And the other thing is, what happens after like this next wave? Do properties that were historically eligible, if they get singled out as historic, what happens then? Like, do we become eligible for Mills Act? Is there any way to, like, I think the unknown is kind of confusing. So if you guys could speak to that, that would be helpful. That's all.
Would you like me to address those now?
Sure. If you can, yeah, that would be great.
Okay. On your second question, what happens after this this survey update? It's important to point out that identification in the survey alone, again, as the ICF team was emphasizing, it does not result in historic designation. Okay. And therefore, in addition, it does not enable property owners to take advantage of the Mills Act program unless the property took that next step for historic designation, either as an HPOZ or individually as a historic cultural monument. Okay. So again, in terms of what happens, again, the survey is being used for planning purposes to help guide the city's long-range planning and project review, but it is not being used for historic designation unless the community really wanted to take that next step. And the same goes for your first question then about the grandfather clause. There's really, again, not a process to opt in or opt out of a survey. If there were to be an effort from the community, if the community wanted to take that next step and perhaps consider a historic district to become an HPOZ or to designate an individual building as a city landmark, a historic cultural monument, the property owner would have many opportunities, or a group of property owners, many opportunities to participate in public workshops and hearings and the decision-making process on such a designation, adoption of such a designation.
Cool. Okay, so to clarify, being historically eligible won't affect like future development of that property unless they take the next step of becoming like verified as a historic property.
Well, so the survey information can help inform the city's review of proposed projects, within the survey area. But part of what is going to be discussed with respect to the plans that are underway right now is how the city may want to change the review process, the regulations for how new development gets considered, and how the survey information comes into play as the city does review new development. So that's really the last stage of this process. It's not something that we're going to be discussing now, as this meeting is really about informing the survey itself. But as was mentioned, we're going to have 3 meetings. And when we get to the 3rd meeting and the survey is completed and the survey findings are completed, that's when we really can discuss, well, what do we want to do with those findings and how do we want to see projects reviewed in Venice based on that survey information. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Jackie. Next up, we have Eric. Eric, can you please unmute yourself? And after Eric, we have Ethan Sensor and then Mark Lanty.
Yes, hi. My name is Eric Schiff. I'm one of the founders of the Venice Homeowners Alliance, which is a nonprofit grassroots organization, collection of hundreds of homeowners here. You know, I think many of us in Venice agree with a lot of the things that have been mentioned that are so historic here in Venice and that should be preserved. And these are things that, you know, that deserve preservation. One of the unfortunate things about the way Survey LA has been used up until this point is that it has greatly harmed a lot of individual homeowners, many of whom have owned their homes here for decades, and at some point then go to sell their homes or want to finally improve their homes. And although Ken Bernstein has mentioned that, and others have mentioned that these are not historical designations, they have been treated as such, and you are actually barred from developing your property as your next door neighbor might, according to the Venice neighborhood and according to the specific plan. The Mills Act, those that do have truly historic properties in the neighborhood have tried to apply for the Mills Act. It's a very high bar. And
you have 30 seconds.
Thank you. The vast majority of these homes that are labeled contributors on Survey LA would never qualify for the Mills Act, and therefore they are being penalized. Their property values, it's been documented that their property values have fallen. These homes are much more difficult to sell as a result, and so you know, finally, we do need to be heard, and the Getty mandated that from the beginning, that those in the neighborhood should be heard, and thank goodness this is happening. But I urge you guys to reach out to individual homeowners who are affected and greatly negatively affected with their own homes.
Thank you, Eric. Next up, we have Ethan Sensor. Ethan, can you please unmute yourself?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, well, hi, my name is Ethan Sensor. I'm a community organizer with Food and Water Action. We're an environmental organization that works mainly around clean energy and building a sustainable regenerative economy. And that really does require us to work deeply with communities and helping them build sort of the future economy and future neighborhoods that they'd like to see. And so what does interest me in this, you know, we're talking about history and preservation, and I think, you know, it's important to always be remembering that history is really central to how we move forward. And sites like, you know, that are going to preserve, it's not just simply about, you know, what their design and all of those good things, but it's also about the people who, you know, have gathered there, who you know, that these are important to, and how these will, you know, can be help bring the community forward into, you know, as they decide to move forward, and what these sites can be doing there. So I just, you know, I think it is really important that we do stress how important centering community is into these discussions about what we preserve, because of how much, you know, that act of preserving can also lead to growth, and figuring out how we want our communities to grow. I do think that, you know, if we're talking about how we want to be helping and, you know, aiding to the growth of communities in Venice, we need to be talking about, you know, racial justice and how we can be encouraging those communities. Yep. Thank you. Racial justice is key to that. So really listening deeply to the Black and Brown community of Venice about what they are interested in preserving and how that will help them continue to grow is key. The First Baptist Church has been mentioned a lot, Oakwood Park. I think it's clear people talked about, you know, the recent protests, how by preserving spaces, we can allow our community to continue to grow. So would really urge Those communities, Save Venice, the people that Lydia Ponce mentioned, that people who are part of that community are put forward and really listened to in terms of how they want preservation to be happening, so that those communities can continue to thrive. So thank you for your time, and that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Ethan. Next, we have Mark Lanty. After Mark, we have Mary Jack, and then Robert Schwan. And then that's the end of our speaker list. So if you're still interested in speaking, please raise your hand. At this time, Mark, can you please unmute yourself?
Hello, this is Mark Galanti. Thank you for the opportunity to speak and comment on Survey LA. So I want to separate two aspects. One is the private property aspect, and then the other is the public assets, the things owned by the public. So first, I'm president of the Venice Canals Association and also president of the Venice Canals Foundation, and we work to protect, preserve, and enhance the Venice canals, or made up of residents and property owners and friends of the canals. And of course, we are very interested in, and it's on the list, but I'm not sure if everything here is on the list. But the Venice canals, especially that was built by Abbot Kinney, which is basically the Grand Canal, and that between North and South Venice, and the vernacular bridges and the walk bridges that go over the canals, including the red car bridge that goes over the Grand Canal. We've got a mural on Dell in Venice, and we have a park, Linney Canal Park, that has historic aspects to it. And we have a boat launching ramp on Venice Boulevard between North and South Venice. And so one of the first things I wanted to talk about in regards to the city-owned assets is, I would imagine we have some friends in the mayor's office.
You have 30 seconds.
Okay, and in City Hall that it seems like we can be able to get a moratorium on destroying these assets while we go through this process. And that's why I separate that from the private aspects. But that's what I wanted to speak to, is how we get a moratorium on destroying these city assets that are historic and need to be preserved, especially as we go through this process. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Next up, we have Mary Jack. Mary, can you please unmute yourself?
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, team, for doing this session for us tonight. It's been really informative, and I've really loved hearing from everybody on the city side and also from our neighbors here in Venice. It's great to hear what everybody has to say. I would like to add that I disagree with some of the developers who are on the call tonight. Sadly, in my experience, the City and Office of Historic Resources have, I would say, abdicated their responsibility to protect our contributors here in Venice. I would like to see more protections. I live in the beautiful Millwood Walk Streets district. I'm so fortunate. It's such a beautiful and historic place to live. I also live nearby the Marion Place area, the little neighborhood. It's just a little short street with a rich history of early Venice homes that are, I believe, slated for demolition. So while all of these homes are not, say, National Register worthy, they all contribute to the whole. So when you look at a street like Marion Place, or you look at the Millwood Walk Streets district, the sum of it, is greater than the individual structures. So I urge you to consider things like that as we move forward. And I also want to give a shout out to the previous speaker, Ethan, who said some beautiful things about, looking at our history as we move forward. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mary Jack. Next, we have Robert Schwan. Robert, can you please unmute yourself?
Okay.
Ooh, sorry about that, Robert. Can you?
Am I good?
Unmute? Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
Jeff, it looks like he's on mute.
Hey.
We hear
Am I
you.
in? Hello. Hello.
Go ahead,
Yes,
Robert.
we could hear you, Robert.
Okay, good. Okay. My thought as I listen to all this, and I'm a 42-year resident of Venice, and particularly in terms of, I happen to be in the business of art and stuff, and so I have a pretty detailed knowledge of the artist studios that have come and gone and stuff, and so on and so forth, and the changes I've seen in Venice. But and everybody has a lot of ideas that are interesting, I understand. But what I don't understand from Ken and the committee is what your idea of property rights are. I mean, if you take people's personal property and if, so to speak, put them in a museum, a historic museum or something, at this point in time, after there's been so much change, and I mean, just I can tell you what I've seen in 42 years, it's unbelievable. But all of a sudden, to just take people's property rights as assets and put them in, like I said, a museum, I just don't understand your view of that. If you're property owners, how you would feel about that. But I just don't understand that. And I don't understand, before you go into all this, what your view of property rights are. I mean, it's a basic fundamental right for a citizen to own a piece of property and control it within universal parameters, not ones just placed on them. So I just would like to hear more about your thoughts on that and how you see that, how you view
Thanks,
that.
Robert. Does someone on the panel want to, or from staff want to assess or address that question?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. Thank you, Robert, for that question. Again, I think this is really not about how I or any member of planning staff kind of personally views property rights. This is something that really gets worked out through the planning and zoning process in conversations like this with the community. And what we're talking about now is really helping to inform the survey itself. But as I said earlier, how the survey actually gets used and what types of planning and zoning regulations are put in place is something that will continue to be worked through in conversations with the community. So nothing's been determined yet in terms of exactly what type of review would be necessary for a property that is identified as historic. Survey LA itself does not provide any type of restrictions like that. The reasons that there have been concerns from the community have to do with some of the requirements of the coastal zone and the California Coastal Act, which has triggered certain levels of review for certain development projects in the Venice community. So I think this is very open right now in terms of how the survey will be used. Other areas of the city have used survey information like this not to prohibit demolitions or alterations of historic structures, but at times, for example, to inform the quality and character of new development, to create new design standards that are compatible for new development in the area. So this is really something that is not about what any planning staff individually or collectively thinks, but something that needs to be work through in the community planning process in these types of meetings and in other ones that will happen between now and plan adoption.
Thanks, Robert. Next up, we have Ingrid Mueller, and then after Ingrid, we have Sean O'Brien. So at this time, Ingrid, can you please unmute yourself? Go ahead, Ingrid. Ingrid, are you there? I guess she's not there. We'll just keep her in the queue in case she comes back. Next up, we have Sean O'Brien. At this time, Sean, can you please unmute yourself?
My unmute button, sorry.
Oh. Yeah, it's okay. Sean, I'm going to mute you again. Ingrid, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'm just on an iPhone. I don't have a computer. I'm Ingrid. I'm a very happy camper in East Venice, in the landmarked Lincoln Place apartments for the last 33 years, and I am wholeheartedly giving all my love. Sorry? You're not hearing me?
No, we are hearing you, Ingrid. You can go ahead.
Okay, hi, Ken.
Hi.
I am wholeheartedly supporting everything that has to do with whatever is left of the Black history in the Oakwood area. And certainly I'm looking forward to the review of the First Baptist Church's historic cultural monument designation process. But what is left in Oakwood area, not just the building, the families, fourth, fifth generation worth of incredible history needs to be, you know, put in a book and made a film off or something. It is so rich and overwhelmingly beautiful. I am so jealous of all that beautiful history that I'm hearing from the residents, but we must resurvey it officially by the city and with a different kind of attention and a more compassionate review.
On 30 seconds.
Okay, that's all right. So I'm hoping that everything will go very well with what the Safe Venice group has started 3 years ago with the unfortunate sale of the building and the 7 lots, but we shall prevail. Thank you.
Thanks, Ingrid. Next up, we have Sean O'Brien. Sean, please unmute yourself.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great, thanks. I do want to thank everybody, you know, the people working, the people that attended. Unfortunately, I missed more than half of it because I've been on another Zoom meeting with Mike Bonin and his town hall safety for CD11. Thank you, Mike Bonin, for once again splitting Venice, you know, to where, like, I don't know if I should be involved in this Zoom meeting or in the other Zoom meeting. But anyways, here I am. And again, thank you for all your hard work. First, I'd like to say, especially with the magnitude of what, you know, we're talking about planning for 20 years into the future, now's not the time to do it through Zoom meetings. This is supposed to be community input. I don't see community. I'm sitting at home. I'm in my house. I'm listening. But when I go to these meetings, I learn a lot. I meet people. If we have the same views, they teach me, I teach them. If we have opposing views, same thing. There's a lot of back and forth going on that is not happening through these Zoom meetings. So first, I'd like to say, let's stop the nonsense. We can wait till COVID clears, you know, vaccine's on its way. Let's put a pin in this and start again in a year, year and a half, or however long it takes for the vaccine to become effective. Second, I'd like to say—
You're coming up on 30 seconds.
Thank you. Second, I'd like to say the Venice Canals is a huge historic district, needs to be preserved. That means the red trolley bridge on the Venice median. You cannot allow any giant mega infrastructure being built. We got to preserve the canals as well as the open space. So, like I said, I missed a lot of your meeting. Thanks to Mike Bonin. I appreciate all your time. Let's put a pin in this. We can, if we waited 25 years, we can wait another year. We don't need to push this through. This is a developer's wet dream. There's actually an exodus out of Los Angeles right now. This is a perceived housing crisis that's really not there. We get 1 million illegal aliens coming in. You don't see them homeless and without housing.
Time. Jeff, we can't hear you.
Thanks, Sean. Next up, we have caller ending in 9405. So if you are that caller, please press *6 to speak. Caller? Oh.
Yes,
we hear you.
hi. Perfect, wonderful. My name is Sarah, and I am with Save Venice, and I am very much so hoping that you guys will take a second look at the First Baptist Church and really the entire Oakwood community. Like many people have stated prior, there's a lot of rich history in Oakwood, and it's not just about developers coming in and doing whatever they want to do. It's about keeping the character of the neighborhood. And even though I hear a lot of, oh, it falls within the guidelines or it falls within their rights and they can build this 2-story, ugly box, there is no preservation of character. In Tucson, they can't even have a yellow arch because it doesn't go with the scenery. Okay? So what I'm saying is we need to do better, and we all know that all of these monstrosities coming in have nothing to do with the Venice character. It was a quaint beachside community, and we need to keep it that way and revisit many, many historical buildings, sites, the entire Oakwood community, and further out, and stop this overdevelopment. Stop the overdevelopment. Venice has a rich history, and you guys are destroying the very essence of what people come to Venice for. If anyone wants to go to Newport Beach, they can
You're
go to
coming
Newport
up on
Beach.
30 seconds.
Wonderful. Venice Beach is not Newport Beach. It is not Pacific Palisades. It's really time everyone takes a step back from greed, from the money-hungry pushing of all of these ugly buildings, and go back to what Venice was. Craftsman houses. Any house that was built as a craftsman house should remain as that. It should never be altered.
Thank you, caller. Our next 3 speakers are going to be Tom Chow and then Judy Goldman, sorry. So at this time, I guess we had another caller, Rachel Placentia. If you still wish to speak, please raise your hand. Tom, at this time, can you please unmute yourself?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I'd like to maybe reflect on some of your answers and some of the previous people. I bought my property here in 2005, and I feel like I've been really royally screwed by this whole process. I'm not a developer, and many people seem to want to blame developers and greed. I'm not. I saved my ass off my entire life to buy a property, a tear down, okay? I bought a tear down. It's termited out. It has no foundation, okay? And now I cannot do anything with it. And this back and forth about saying the Survey LA does not limit your ability to develop that's not true, okay? Basically, I bought a piece of property, now I can't do anything with it. That's how I feel. Because just because I did not save enough money to be able to renovate or rebuild before 2014. Okay, so I think you're really screwing a lot of people over. I don't think it's fair to say, oh, it's just developers and greed. There are many people in my situation, homeowners that saved their ass off to buy a piece of property. Now they can't do anything with it. And some of these properties are not, right? My house was actually tacked on years after years. And what I did was I just made it pretty, right? I just made it, I painted it, I kept it up. But now, even if I wanted to develop, so someone mentioned sustainable housing, someone mentioned housing, if I wanted to put another ADU or anything like that, I'm prevented from doing that. So I have both sides. The regulations are this.
Caller, you're coming up on 30 seconds.
Okay, plus the drive to build more housing, to have affordable housing. Well, okay, I'm willing to do that. I want to do that, but now I can't do it. Okay, so I really think you should consult with the homeowners and really get a sense of, instead of just throwing this as a broad brush and screwing a lot of small people over. So that's all I have to say.
All right, thanks, Tom. Next up, we have Judy Goldman. Judy, can you please unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So I've been a Venice resident living in a historic
district in a historic home for 50 years. And I think my biggest question and concern is how the new community plan is going to be involved, how you're going to coordinate with the community plan update that's going on. Because what I'm hearing, what I'm reading, and what I'm learning is that the community plan update is proposing so much mixed use on what they're calling mixed use corridors, which are really getting converted into commercial corridors, Rose Avenue and Oceanfront Walk. That what I see is the destruction of one of the most important things that I consider part of the history of Venice, which is the community, the diversity, the economic, the social, the ethnic diversity, and the people living in the rent stabilized buildings, mostly historic buildings, many of them beautiful old buildings that are, my fear is that are going to be converted to mixed use, and that the mixed use will allow developers to convert housing into commercial use. And that, I think, is going to destroy the historic character of our neighborhoods, of our residential area.
You have 30 seconds.
Is my time up?
No, you have 20 seconds left.
Okay, so I would urge you to collaborate with the folks who are doing the community plan update to protect the housing, the homes, particularly the rent stabilized homes in the historic buildings, so that Rose Avenue and Oceanfront Walk don't get commercialized and Disneyfied. We don't want our walk streets to turn into a little corner that's in the middle of basically a Disneyland on the beach. Thank you, and thank you for doing this. I'm so sorry that I couldn't be here the whole time, that there were 2 Venice webinars scheduled at the same time, which I hope doesn't happen again. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Next up, we have Kasaba Yalan. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Kasaba, can you please unmute yourself?
Yes. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. Well, thank you for everybody for participating. It's really good to hear from everybody from both sides. I like to clear up a few things. Unfortunately, Barry Casilli was cut off at the beginning, and I'm not sure if he's on the line, but maybe it would be fair to close the lawsuit that he won against the city regarding this very issue, because, there are people. I sold a property, I'm a realtor, and I sold a property on Rialto, which was really, the owner took a hit of a couple of $100,000 because of the limitation this exposed. So I would like Ken to address and clarify what he said, that this doesn't affect the ownership, because that's what I heard him say, and that's not, our experience. And what are the effects? And he also said that we don't know, we'll see what this will do once we finish it. I mean, this was finished, so we kind of know what they wanted to do with it. So this is a redo because of the lawsuit. So I like Ken to clear those things up, if that would be possible, because he clearly said that this doesn't affect, like, you can tear down your property. I mean, I think that's an untrue statement. So that's just, I like to get some clarifications here for that, because I think this, in effect, had a lot of limitations on these properties. And yeah, I think
Caller, you have
that's
seconds.
all. Yeah, that's all. And maybe someone could disclose the lawsuit, so we know, why this is happening again, even though this was done in starting 2014, a couple of years ago. So that would be, I think, fair that,
So I'm happy to address that. First, I wanted to indicate that This survey update really is not related to the lawsuit that was being cited. We did feel it was important because the community plan is going forward to have an updated, fully vetted, current survey to inform the community planning findings and any kind of project level review moving forward in the city. I don't think I did say that properties can just be demolished if they're on the survey. What I want to maybe explain is what the lawsuit did and did not say. Barry Castley, who spoke earlier, was the petitioner in that case against the city. And I would say it was a mixed result from the court, I think is the way that I would characterize it. On the one hand, the city's actions with respect to Mr. Castley's property were upheld by the court. However, Mr. Castley and his attorneys did prevail on certain aspects of the case. One of those was that it reinforced the petitioner's point that Survey LA could not in and of itself be used as a presumption of significance for a historic resource under state environmental law, the California Environmental Quality Act. So as a result of that, the city did have to remove a series of what were called zoning information files, or ZIs, that were meant to help inform property owners in Venice that their property may have been included in a historic resource survey. It had that informational purpose. There was language in that ZI that seemed to convey that there was a presumption of significance if a property was identified as a historical resource. And we have now, as a result of that litigation, removed the former ZIs and replaced it with new ZIs that make clear that there is not a presumption of significance as a result of inclusion within the historical resource survey. However, the court did not say that the survey was without meaning altogether, or that it couldn't be used in conjunction with other expertise or substantial evidence to evaluate whether there might be impacts to a historic resource as a result of a project. So that is what that court decision provided, but this effort in the survey update was not related to that court decision at all, but is meant to ensure that we have complete, thorough, objective historic resource information, and that we kind of cast the net more widely again, based on some of the concerns that we've heard coming out of the litigation from homeowners and property owners that we have heard from. And many of you were at a community meeting I attended a few years ago in Venice, where that message was delivered loud and clear. We wanted to make certain that we had broad-based input from property owners, broad-based input from other Venetians who have lots of input. We've heard from the Oakwood community, many others, about feelings that the survey should be updated in other ways. So it was really all of that rather than any litigation that led to this being part of the community planning effort. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gustavo. Next up, we have Beth Allen. Beth, at this time, can you please unmute yourself? And after Beth, we don't have any speakers with their hands raised. And so at this time, if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. Beth, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we could hear you. Perfectly.
Okay, hi. I too am sorry I'm joining late because I was also attending the other Zoom meeting. So this is bad planning on someone's part. And speaking of bad planning, I did get to hear, I believe his name was Sean, and he was right. I feel like with the pandemic and the importance of what it is that's being discussed here, you should put a pin in it. And we can come back in a year's time and revisit a lot of this. And then maybe people can start meeting in smaller groups and getting a much more clearer picture about their neighborhoods. If that's not the case, though, I strongly support the historical cultural status of First Baptist Church of Venice. I grew up in another place. I know what the importance of that church is. I get that a lot of people don't, but you only have to stand in front of it to realize what it was meant to say. That being said, I also have some concerns about the Rose Avenue and Oceanfront Walk area because that directly affects my life. I live right outside of the Israel 11. And I can tell you, going from a historic one-story building to a three-story corner-to-corner lot, which I'm afraid is actually going to have some LED lights on it, my life just got altered greatly. And if this is what's going to happen all the way up and down Oceanfront Walk, a lot of people's life is going to be impacted very negatively. These buildings are not good. Okay, these buildings are not good for the residents. They might be good for other people, but I have also supported the businesses. I have supported the waterfront, you know, so I get that there's a compromise, but you cannot do this all the way down Oceanfront Walk. 3 stories is just in maybe even 4. So put a pin in it, come back in a year, let us all have a clearer head outside of a pandemic. That about covers. You're very welcome.
So is there anyone that hasn't spoken that wishes to speak at this time? We have some speakers that wish to speak again or follow up on their comment. But if we have anyone that hasn't spoken, I'd like to invite them to speak at this time. This includes everyone that spoke in the beginning. So that would be Barry Castley, Ali Bean, Lydia Ponce, Sultan and Robin. You guys had spoken in the beginning, and so if you guys wish to speak again, we'd entertain that. So at this time, I would like to ask the caller ending in 9405 to please unmute herself, and the floor is yours. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to kind of echo what a few people had also said about these meetings. You know, there is a continuance of double booking of meetings, and people are literally having to choose between what is more important in the neighborhood. And likewise, I've also found, there is no community feedback. There is no engagement. There is none of what makes these meetings and what we fight for, which is community in this. And likewise, a lot of people are having issues with technology and not being able to run these meetings, let people in. People are being muted and cut off. And this, honestly, I feel like is a way to really actually mute people's voices. So I very much so strongly agree that we need to kind of circle back on a lot of this stuff when the pandemic is over, because we're just not able to really communicate the way we need to. And I quite frankly don't appreciate, hearing or being muted on Zoom, or not being able to get into a Zoom meeting, or having to have 37 passwords and meeting IDs. I just want to get to the bottom of it. So thank you.
Thank you, caller. Lydia Ponce, would you unmute yourself, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for the opportunity. I failed in the prior conversation to ask and have you consider, I'm sure a lot of us pro-history, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color would be in favor of a moratorium on demolitions. That would solve problems of losing something completely to someone's property rights. Let's talk about property rights. This is the Native American Heritage Month. Has anyone who's claiming their property rights done anything for any of the original people? Because this is all stolen indigenous land. The second part, my last point, is if you'd consider a moratorium, unfortunately, some other people would be unhappy and they wouldn't be able to demo something that should be considered historical and relevant in regards to saving the story of a space and a place. Not everyone is looking to profit off of their perceived ego and their capitalistic point of view of owning property. There's a lot of dead bodies buried in the backyards of some of these Oakwood homes or Venice homes, because there wasn't a place to bury our loved ones in Black and brown cemeteries, and who could afford to do that? You have a lot of working families at the time, And you really should look into the Fox Theater, Smart and Final territory, that whole property lot. It used to be a white only cemetery. So I'm not going to have a lot of friends or fans on this call. 30 seconds. Thank you. I don't really care because I don't know them anyways. They have such high fences. There's about a handful of people that I know here. And that's the relevancy of what we were in the past to who we are today. We have a lot of healing to do. Thank you.
Thanks, Lydia. Next up, we have Mark Lancy. This is going to be your second comment. So yeah, at this time, please unmute yourself.
Thanks, Jeff. I wanted to finish up on what I was saying earlier. So I owned a 1920s home on the canals at one point, and which I've sold not too long ago, and preserved it for 35 years. And the reason I was identifying the difference between private property and city-owned property is because I know from my own experience that the process was inhibiting to me as a property owner. And I know lots of neighbors who have historic homes who have gone through nightmares themselves in trying to deal with those properties. And so what I want to ask is this, you know, what I'm happy here is I'd like to see these homes protected, but I don't want to see property rights of private individuals taken advantage of to somebody who doesn't even have a historic home. And the way that this can be helped with is through incentive programs, which I think, you know, the city, the county, the state, and the national can come together to come up with incentives, including serious tax breaks and other methods. Now, I have no property in this game. I'm now mostly interested in preserving public assets, like I mentioned earlier. But I would hope, you know, not waiting till this process is over again, is to find ways
Mark,
to
30 seconds.
create incentives for these property owners to maintain the properties as is, and have it as an optional or volunteer. And then finally, in question 2, there are a lot of historians that have written books, and part of the groups like the Venice heritage groups that try to protect these public sites, and I hope you'll meet with them and try to work with them to identify properties, and again protect the public assets that should be preserved, and work with the property owners to find a fair and common way to keep them, to preserve them as well. Thank you.
Mark, at this time, Barry Castley, can you please unmute yourself? And the floor is yours.
Hello? Yeah,
we can hear you.
Hi. There's really too much to say for this small meeting, but you know, I think the concern of Venice residents who really are committed to Venice, we've lived here for decades, many of us. We're very involved in the history of the community, is that OHR basically has come in and used or abused the principles of historic preservation, and I'm a preservationist. And they have used technicalities of CEQA and historic categories to treat people's homes as historic properties without going through the legally transparent processes which they administer. Nobody in Venice has any problem with somebody trying to designate an individual property as a historic resource. Nobody has any problem with going through the HPOZ process as legally defined. What we have a problem with is OHR using the Survey LA process to do an end run around the legally available homeowner involved processes for historic designation. The only reason OHR wants to embed Survey LA in the community plan is to do an end run around the legally available processes for historic designation. That's the truth of the matter. Sorry that we had to sue the city to establish that, but That's the facts. If you could assure us in some way that that won't happen again because of what's going on right now, we'd all calm down. But the history has been people tried to renovate their homes, people bought properties, tried to build their houses there, and I hear you, and we're prevented from doing so by OHR abusing CEQA, abusing the historic processes. It's really a conflict of interest that one city agency is designated as the lead agency for CEQA in the city of LA and is in control of the historic processes in the city. It's been abused. We don't trust you guys. That's what's going on here. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment, Barry. So this is going to be a last call for comments. So if you want to make a comment, please raise your hand at this time. And the next three speakers we have, the next three speakers that we have is going to be Brian Silvera, Sue Kaplan, and Robert Schwan. So at this time, Brian, can you please unmute yourself?
Hello there, guys. Thank you so much. I'm joining this late, so unfortunately I can't comment on a lot of what was presented earlier, and I'm sure what was a good conversation. But I did hear comments from the last few callers, which is the reason why I wanted to speak. I respectfully disagree with the idea that we need to put a pin in this, or kick the can down the road, or whatever you want to call it, because of COVID. I think that this community plan update is probably about 10 years too late. All of the problems that it's meant to address and would address are problems that have been happening for a very long time, which have led to the proliferation of single-family homes and unaffordability in Venice. And I think now more than ever, especially because of COVID, we need to be thinking about how to change the zoning to deal with these problems, to create more affordable housing, more middle-income housing, and just better housing options than what we're getting. So I think that this needs to happen. I do think, because it's being done on Zoom, that there needs to be more patience, and we need to take our time and make sure that there's proper input. But there's nothing wrong with Zoom. I mean, people, if anything, I think it creates a more civilized environment for people to discuss these things. And limiting people's time is not a bad thing, because everyone needs to speak.
Coming up on 30 seconds.
Thank you. My point exactly. This meeting's been going on for almost 3 hours. So that's all I wanted to say. And thank you for all your hard work. And we do appreciate you. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. At this time, we'll have Sue Kaplan speak. Sue, can you please unmute yourself?
Ken, thank you for clarifying. I was very curious about the outcome of the lawsuit, but I can't remain quiet. I have issues too with the Survey LA, and you know about them, and now I'm very concerned about what kind of protections our neighborhoods, and Venice, as I said, Venice is an historical community. What protections, what are we going to lose because of that lawsuit? In my neighborhood, I've counted that we have lost 9 contributors, and important ones, due to alterations that you approved, which are just wrong, or that they have, or houses that have been already demolished. We have several that OHR decided were not contributors and have given the go-ahead for them to be destroyed. This does ruin our chances of being designated historic district. And I just want to know what your plans are to really protect and sustain the history.
You have 30 seconds.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Ken, do you want to address Sue's questions?
Sure. Thank you, Sue. You know, it's interesting. I think as most of you joining us this evening can probably hear, the Office of Historic Resources may not be the most popular entity in Venice. I think there's a segment of the community who obviously feels that we have been impinging upon private property rights on one side, and another side that may feel that we have not been vigilant enough or restrictive enough in applying the Survey LA data previously to prevent demolitions and alterations of historic resources. You know, and we're not going to kind of relitigate each individual case or even the litigation that we talked about earlier. I think what we want to do is look forward and talk about how we can make certain that the survey identification really takes into account the input of everyone in the community, property owners, preservation activists, historians, community members, the Oakwood community, as we've talked about, indigenous and BIPOC communities, as has been stated tonight, and have all of that input. And again, I think the ultimate outcome in terms of what our land use and zoning regulations or what our community plan policies look like, that will be informed by the survey data, but will be determined through the community plan process that will extend certainly beyond. I hope that the pandemic is over by the spring and we have a vaccine and we'll be getting back to face-to-face meetings to really hash a lot of that out. The last meetings of this process, as well as other workshops and meetings that will happen as part of this process. So I don't know if Heidi or any member of the community plan team wants to add to that, but I think that's how the process will play out from this point.
Thank you, Ken. Our last speaker is going to be Robert Schwan. Robert, can you please unmute yourself, and floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. First of all, I just want to say that I have no problem with the Zoom meeting, and I really appreciate the work that has gone into this on all of your parts, whether I agree with it or not. But I do feel a need to emphasize there's been a mischaracterization of people necessarily opposed to it. Some of us, all we have is this property that we've lived in Venice for a long time. And if the value is taken from it as we go into our senior years, it's a big deal. It's a huge impact on our lives. It's not a minor thing. And some seniors, we may not even have a choice but to, use the equity in our property to move ourselves into this last phase of life. So I just want to point that out. It's not it's something that someone's rights to use what they have, shouldn't be subjective to one group's ideas. And if we could get past that, then there could be a greater contribution, certainly from, someone like myself, who, like I said, has been in Venice for 42 years. And lastly, let me say, some of my neighbors are here talking about this. They've already done things to their properties that wouldn't be allowed now. I mean, so that's kind of an amazing thing to me. But, I hope we can get beyond this and work together towards some greater good with this without having some people get the bill for it. You know what I mean? Some people. So anyways, enough said.
Thanks, Robert. So that's our last speaker for tonight. At this time, I'm going to hand it back to Laura McPherson.
Thank you, Jeff and Eva, for being excellent switchboard operators. Really appreciate it. And again, thank you to all the attendees and folks in Venice who have stayed on with us this long. We really appreciate all of you who have come. Thank you, Barry, Ali, Lydia, Mike, and Sultan for your comments. Also, Kalani, Rick, Jane, we appreciate your thoughts that you shared. Also, Mike, Naomi, Sue, Jackie, and Eric and Ethan, thank you for being a part of this meeting. As well as Mark, Mary, Jack, Robert, Ingrid, and Sean, as well as Sarah, Tom, Judy, Rachel, Kasba, Beth, Lydia again, Mark and Brian and Robert. I hope I didn't forget anyone, but thank you for all your comments, and to everyone who called in and is listening. I hope that you enjoyed hearing your neighbors. I know we can't all be together and, you know, not in the big gymnasiums or the library, but I'm confident we will be all together again soon. So that concludes this evening's presentation, and really you all made this a really successful event just by showing up and being a part of it. So we are very grateful for that. We just want to remind you all that, you know, this is just a first step in the process, and there's going to be a lot more opportunities to get involved. And so there will be an email coming out in the next 24 hours, and it will have a link to a Google form on it. So we welcome you to put some more thoughts or questions in there. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. And also Simi's contact is going to be showing here now. You can email Simi anytime. Her email is simi, simi.lualiu@lacity.org. And again, as we send you off, there's one last thing I remembered. In terms of comments on this first part of the meeting, we're going to be accepting comments until December 31st. Probably, I guess, at midnight would be an appropriate time to close the comment window. So if you don't have plans for New Year's 2021, it's a very COVID friendly stay at home and submit some feedback activity you can do with your bubble, if you will. Yeah, so as we send you out into the night, just remember to stay safe, stay vigilant, look out for each other. And again, a huge thank you to all the essential workers and their families. So take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Laura.